Hello. All the recent D&D games that I've played seem to be conducted by overambitious people who need to make up their own world or put their unique twist on the adventures published by Wizards of the Coast. They seem to know better that you need to advanced players with milestones, what rules to enforce, and how should economy and pricing work in their universe. And yet they don't know what any ability does, even though the description is in front of their face, and start the party off at 3rd or 5th level with their starting equipment and nothing to show for their adventures so far. Then the characters are hired to rid the city of the problems that plagued the population for tens of years and are offered about 20 gold each for their effort. Also, after a massive slog through a dungeon, you barely gain a single level. I also saw someone doing Solo D&D, but that did not meet my expectations, as I was expecting a player with their one character put against the challenge of the game. Unfortunately, they used an entire party, so they weren't put to the absolute limit of their ability. I tried to find someone who would just run a simple, unmodified, pre-written game for me, where I could see how the writers envision how the rewards in experience, wealth can be spent in the world they designed, and considering how poorly the 5th edition is written and how hard it is to wipe out the entire group of players, I decided to play a true solo D&D game. Unfortunately, that will make it a bit harder to avoid metagaming since I am the game master and also a player. But for the transparency and the ability for you to follow at home, here are a few guidelines I'll be following. First off, only one character. Not a party, only one hero is allowed, unless the game provides an NPC that could join you and give you some help. Second, rules as written. Now, the rules aren't written too well, but when in doubt, rule on the player's favor. Third, the character creation and the rest of the game allows all official published content from Wizards of the Coast. Fourth, to determine the stats, I could point by, take a standard array, or roll. Rolling allows for higher results, but at the cost of way lower. It is possible to create a very strong specimen like that, but to take off a bit of an edge from this already dire situation, I'm going for point buy with 30 points, however no attribute can be initially risen over 15 when spending the allotment. Personally, I spent those points on mitigating my weaknesses rather than just focusing on the strengths. The advancement will be done through experience as opposed to milestones. The checks will be done with double rolls, and if there is no advantage or disadvantage, the result on the left will be considered the one that counts. And with that, I will be playing a human wizard with Silver Quill student background, starting at level 1, and I will be playing through Lost Mines of Phandelver. The mage's story, motivations, and ideals are his own, and roleplay is not a big part of this playthrough. We will focus on the combat challenge, and there will be spoilers for the module. If I make any mistakes with the rules, feel free to correct me, as I'd rather know the right way to do it, instead of continually making shit up as I go along. I will clarify any additional rulings as they become relevant, like multi-classing or feats, or anything else that I actually forgot about, because this isn't scripted, but with that, the stage is set. Let us begin. Avestrum ventured across the Sea of the Fallen Stars from the east to visit the famous cities of the Sword Coast as a post-graduation trip. In the city of Neverwinter, a dwarf named Gundren Rockseeker was asking for help to bring a wagon load of provisions to the rough and tumble settlement of Phandalin, a couple of days' travel southeast of the city. Gundren was clearly excited and more than a little secretive about his reasons for the trip, saying only that he and his brothers had found something big and that he'd pay 40 gold pieces to a band of mercenaries for escorting his supplies safely to Barthen's Provisions, a trading post in Phandalin. He then set out ahead of you on a horse along with a warrior escort named Sildar Hallwinter, claiming he needed to arrive early to take care of business. Avestrum took the dwarf up on his offer, lying that him and his friends will take care of the job. He just needs to go get them. Certain of his abilities, he went alone, hoping to keep all the money for himself. The mage spent the last few days following the high road south from Neverwinter, and he just recently veered east along the Tribor Trail. Avestrum encountered no trouble so far, but this territory can be dangerous. Bandits and outlaws have been known to lurk around the trail. Our hero has been on the Tribor Trail for about half a day. As he comes around the bend, he spots 2 dead horses sprawled about 50 feet ahead of him, blocking the path. Each has several black feathered arrows sticking out of him. The woods press close to the trail here, with a steep embankment and dense thickets on either side. This is fishy. Something happened here, and wild animals haven't come to rip the carcasses apart and get an easy meal. A careful investigation is required. Fortunately, the young wizard is ready. He already used his starting gold to pay for components, which he used for Find Familiar spell. The summoned spirit was made to take the form of an owl, and now it's time for it to shine. The dead horses in the middle of the road are in fact a bait for the goblin ambush, and as per rules of the engagement, the creatures get to roll a stealth check, which will then be compared to the character's passive perception score. The goblins rolled quite well, and they are in fact hidden, but the mage has to be careful. He gets off the wagon and utilizes the bushes to the west to hide as well, and observe the situation for a little while before acting. Working together with his familiar, he achieves the score of 15 and the owl 17. As no blows have been thrown yet, the goblins' passive perception doesn't allow them to keep track with Avestrum and his pet. Some time passes, but the stationary observation doesn't yield any results. The wizard decides to order his familiar to fly in the air and circle around the dead animals, and relying on the bird's eye view of the situation. The owl's keen senses are enough to spot the weakest link in the goblin's formation. The goblin on the south side, nearest the road, has been spotted. The magical servant uses the telepathic bond it shares with its master to relay its location to the best of its ability. The ambush is confirmed, and if there is one, there are bound to be more. The magician closes the distance and aims his spell right at the described location. He reaches for his tome, speaks the words of power, and performs the gestures. His arcane focus shimmers, and an almost invisible dust rises slightly off the ground in 20-foot radius from the point of his choosing, casting Sleep. His words give away his position, but he's able to put into slumber 22 hit points worth of creatures within the area. The fight begins for good, and initiative is rolled. Fortunately for our hero, he rolls very well and gets to go first. The familiar isn't far behind. 3 goblins are now asleep, fallen prone, dropping everything they were holding, and unconscious. One of them, however, manages to avoid the effect of the spell. The mage goes first, and he has to work alone. In free action, he drops prone, and uses his action to attempt to hide in the bushes again. Considering he laid down, he could get an advantage. Otherwise, his result is only 6. The owl continues to circle around the ambush site, providing overwatch and relaying information back to its master. The remaining goblin notices his friend falls down for no apparent reason. He moves closer, attempts to spot his opponent, but does an even worse job than Avestrum's hiding attempt. He has to roll as well, as it is a stressful situation full of distractions now, and it's harder to focus. Failing at his task, the enemy spends his action waking up his comrade, shaking him violently and speaking to him. He is successful, but now 2 goblins are not hiding, and the turn hasn't progressed yet. The goblin uses bonus action to hide again. He's quite proficient and the result is high. The next round begins. The wizard will react to the commotion when his spiritual companion relays the information about the location of a new target. The mage spends half of his movement to get up, aims at the spot, says the incantation, and winds up a throw where a small flaming projectile leaves his hand and increases in velocity as it travels closer to its target. The awakened goblin is obscured, which incurs a disadvantage, but the firebolt finds its mark, and the hot flame scorches and melts the enemy's unprotected skin, dealing enough damage to take him out in one shot. Avestrum then falls down to the ground, presenting smaller target to the enemy. The owl continues to scout from above. It peels its eyes and ears, searching for targets, and with its positional and racial advantages, it spots the one that's been recently active. The new intel, as usual, immediately goes to its master. 2 goblins remain asleep. One is down and out, but the 4th one knows where his target is, takes aim with its short bow, and releases the arrow. It seems the projectile found its mark, sinking deep into his flesh. Is it all over? The damage is enough for the human to lose consciousness, but does he? The black fletchings at the end of the shaft point to where it landed, but the goblin is mistaken. The hit was not critical, as lying prone incurs disadvantage on attacks from a distance. The protagonist is still able to fight, to the archer's dismay, and as the combat continues, he again uses his bonus action to hide away, once again doing it expertly. He is now beyond the ability of his foes to find him. The order comes round again, and the wizard takes his time to speak a prayer and put his hands together in gestures that allows him to touch his arrow wound and restore much of his health as the soothing green glow around his hand fades away. And just in time as well, as another arrow loosened from the short bow of a goblin lands head first in his body. Fortunately for the mage, the damage wasn't big, and the face-off continues. The small creature once again tucks back into the bushes and disappears from sight, leaving his enemies clueless. Avestrum is unable to find his target and decides to increase his defenses by sneaking deeper into the thickets. His attempt is so successful that in turn it's the goblin who won't be able to find his foe. The owl remains in the air, keeping its eye on the road. The goblin has no help and no target, and he hasn't heard the rest of his squad fighting back. He decides to check up on them and regroup, moving across the path. That forces him out of hiding, and the familiar in the sky takes note of that. The goblin dives into the bushes, finds his comrades, but has enough time only to wake up one, which he attempts successfully, and uses the shadows to conceal himself again. But this won't be enough. The cover is blown regardless, and the mage is ready to cast one last spell. He stands up, finds the area described by his companion, and yet again casts Sleep, this time being able to put down 31 hit points worth of creatures. If this was his first roll, the combat would have been over a long time ago. There is no defense. The ambush is no more, but the fight is not over. It's now a race against time. After using his magic, Avestrum gets up and moves towards the group as fast as he can. The next round is spent moving even closer and firing off a firebolt at an unconscious creature. The stillness of his target works in his advantage as he strikes the flaming burst critically. Another 6 seconds go by. He moves in closer to the next target, tries to finish it off, but misses. However, we haven't rolled critical damage for the previous target, and since the damage is auto-rolled, the next damage die that would be applicable results in 10, which does in fact eliminate the previous goblin in one strike. The time is running short. The next hot cantrip bursts against the next body, dealing only 5 damage. This is not enough to eliminate him outright, and what's worse, it wakes him up. The situation is dire. The owl swoops down to give help action to its master. The small humanoid is laying prone, having dropped everything that he was holding. Seeing the rest of his company knocked out cold or outright dying, he could give up, but if he took a swing, he could come out victorious. Unfortunately, at this point I made a bit of a mistake. I kept rolling attacks to finish off the monsters, and once I have noticed the damage wasn't enough, an extra attack has already been performed. The story can end right here, with the goblin drawing his sword, easily hitting and easily dealing enough damage to eliminate the human. So I made a separate roll for its attack, and believe it or not, it came up as 2, and with its +4 to attack, it wasn't enough to get through the defenses. In addition, the attack roll I've made resulted in 12, which would have hit if not for the goblin's attack bonus of 1 less than my own. Luckily, on all accounts, the wizard dodged the attack and retaliated. Being this close to his enemy didn't help, however the destruction provided by the familiar was enough to steady his aim. Another firebolt smashed against the small creature and eliminated it for good. But it ain't over till it's over. The sleep spell has almost dissipated, and the situation can repeat itself. Avestrum can run, hide, or try to finish it right now. None of these options is sure, but he strikes, and hits. 4. 6 damage with 1 dice. On its own, it's not enough, but he still has another dice to go, and unbeknownst to him, it can't result in less than his enemy's full HP. The result is 7, and the victory is assured. Now, in relative safety, the wizard can loot the bodies, pack it on the wagon, and investigate the site, which he will have done in the next episode. However, there is another issue. When the goblins fall asleep, prone, dropping everything they were carrying in their hands, at least some of those items would have been shields that increased their AC, and if they let go of them, their defenses would have lowered, and the last spell miss could have been a hit. This, however, would have left the critical damage unresolved, which is why I did in fact roll additional 2 d10s, giving me the result of 5 and 7. The first one is for the first time I omitted to include the extra damage, and the last one is for the last attack. When the 10 would have hit, that also would have been enough to make the NPC's health go below 0. So it looks like it's a win-win either way. Lost Mines of Phandelver is designed for a party of 4 or 5 characters, all level 1. So out of this encounter, each of the NPCs yields 50 experience points. That would be evenly split amongst the group members. At the end of this section, everyone is also rewarded with 25 experience points for investigating the place, finding clues, and progressing forwards. However, we have only one player character, which means he gets all the experience points. In addition, an encounter builder available on D&D Beyond will tell you that one guy at first level facing off 4 goblins is deadly, and the adjusted experience is a result of multiplying the pool by 2.5, granting in total 500 experience points. And this is the question I pose to you, viewer. What do you think should happen? At the least, Avestum should receive 225 experience points. If we include the totality for completing this encounter, it would be 300, enough for him to level up. And if we adjust the rewards with the difficulty, the total boon will be 525 experience points, if not 600. What would be your decision? If I won't get any responses in time, I will decide myself. And since we've got an advancement ahead of us, at 2nd level we've got an arcane tradition to select, and I'm torn between a necromancer and a chronologist. Also, again, to make it just a little bit easier, I think the hit points will be rolled or average, whichever is higher. And that's it for today. If you enjoyed it, interact with the video, share it, and we could possibly see each other in the next installment of true Solo D&D.